The rain hammered against the rooftop of Kala's apartment like 1,000 tiny fists demanding entry. She sat cross-legged on her worn couch, nursing a cup of instant noodles and scrolling through her phone with the kind of exhaustion that came from a 12-hour shift at the spaceport customs office. Another day of scanning cargo manifests. Another day of pretending that humanity's integration into the Galactic Coalition meant something more than being the newest, weakest link in a chain that stretched across star systems. The knock came at 11:47 p.m., not a doorbell. Not a buzz from the intercom. A knock heavy, deliberate, and somehow ancient in its rhythm. Kyla froze, noodles halfway to her mouth. Nobody knocked anymore. Everyone texted first, called ahead, sent a drone with a message. The only ones who knocked were either lost, drunk, or selling something nobody wanted. She set down her cup and padded to the door in her socks, peering through the peephole. What she saw made her breath catch. A figure stood in the hallway tall, impossibly tall, with shoulders that seemed to fill the entire corridor. But it was the scales that caught her attention, crimson and gold, gleaming even in the dim fluorescent light. They covered exposed skin like armor, and when the figure shifted, she caught the glint of eyes that burned with an inner fire. A dragon, a Pirathi one of the ancient dragon lords who ruled entire sectors before humanity had even discovered fire. Kala opened the door. She didn't think about it, didn't hesitate. Didn't reach for the panic button installed in every human dwelling since first contact. She just turned the lock and pulled the door open like it was the most natural thing in the universe. The Pirathi stared at her with eyes that had witnessed empires rise and fall. Rain dripped from his tattered coat, an actual Earth-style trench coat that looked absurdly small on his massive frame. His horns, once probably magnificent, were chipped and dulled. One wing tucked against his back was torn, the membrane patched with what looked like industrial tape. "You're Kala," he said. His voice rumbled like distant thunder, but there was something broken in it, something that reminded her of wind through abandoned buildings. "And you're soaking wet," she replied, stepping aside. "Come in." He didn't move. You're inviting me in?" "You knocked," I answered. "That's how doors work." She gestured impatiently. "You're letting the heat out." Pyroshi would learn his name later. Whispered like a confession over cheap coffee, entered her apartment with the careful movements of someone who'd forgotten how to be welcome anywhere. He had to duck to clear the doorframe, and his tail swept a stack of delivery menus off her counter. "Sorry," he muttered, and the word sounded like it cost him something precious. Kyla grabbed a towel from the bathroom and tossed it to him. He caught it with reflexes that were still dragon-fast, still dangerous, still magnificent despite everything. "Show," she said, returning to her couch and picking up her noodles. "Dethroned Dragon King. That's a hell of a Tuesday night." Pyro's eyes widened. "How did you... You've got that look." "My grandfather had it after the factory closed." Pride mixed with what the fuck do I do now? She slurped her noodles. "Also, you're wearing a trench coat in August. Nobody does that unless they're hiding something or hiding from something." He was silent for a long moment, wringing water from the towel with clawed hands that could have torn through starship hulls. "The conclave voted me out. Said I was ... obsolete, that my methods were too old, too brutal. They want dragons who smile for the cameras, who attend galas, who pretend we're not apex predators playing at politics. Sounds rough?" "Rough?" He laughed, and it was a bitter sound. "I ruled the Ember Reaches for 3,000 years. I brought 17 species under my protection. I held the Void Sworn at bay during the Dark Crossing, and they dismissed me like I was... human?" Kala offered. Pyro's jaw snapped shut. He stared at her, really looked at her for the first time. This small creature in ratty pajamas, eating poverty food in a box apartment on a backwater planet, who had opened her door to a 7-foot dragon without hesitation. "Why did you let me in?" he asked quietly. Kala set down her cup. "Because you knocked like you needed something, and I know what it's like to need something. Because everyone else in the galaxy treats us like we're puppies who just learned to walk upright, and I figured you could use someone who doesn't give a shit about your credentials." She paused. "Also, you looked like you were about to cry, and I wasn't going to let someone cry in my hallway. Mrs. Chun from 3B would never let me hear the end of it." Something in Pyro's expression cracked. The mask of the ancient dragon lord, the conqueror, the king it slipped, and underneath was just exhaustion, just loneliness, just the weight of centuries bearing down on someone who'd finally run out of strength to carry them. I don't know what to do, he whispered. For the first time in 3 millennia, I don't know what happens next. Kayla stood up and walked over to him. She barely came up to his chest, but she looked up at those burning eyes without fear. Then you figure it out. That's what us humans do. We fuck up, we fail, we fall, and then we figure it out. We're good at starting over. Had to do it after the water wars, after the expansion collapse, after first contact when everyone told us we'd never matter. She held out her hand. So here's what happens next. You take a breath. You dry off. And tomorrow we figure out step 2. Together, if you want. Or alone, if that's your thing. But tonight, you're not in a hallway pretending you're okay. Pyro stared at her, hand small, 5-fingered, utterly fragile. In his prime, he could have incinerated her with a thought. He'd burned armies, shattered moons, made gods bow. And now, he took her hand like it was a lifeline. Thank you, he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. Kayla squeezed his talons gently. Don't thank me yet. My couch is lumpy, I only have instant coffee, and you're probably going to hate human breakfast food. But she was smiling, and after a moment, Pyro smiled too, a real smile. Not the calculated expression of a king, but the tentative hope of someone who just discovered that falling didn't have to mean landing alone. Outside, the rain continued to fall on Earth. That strange little planet where humanity had learned that the universe was vast and uncaring and full of beings who were older, stronger, wiser. And yet, somehow it was always a human who opened the door when someone needed it most. Not because they were powerful, but because they knew what it meant to be powerless. And they'd be damned if they'd let anyone face that darkness alone.